Next up, continuing some of the fireside chats that we're having, we're going to have Mike Vizard from IT Business Edge and Container Journal coming up and talking to an individual who I've been working with for over a year now, who has a very, very interesting perspective on all of this. So Nishi Davidson is a director of cloud engineering and architecture at SAP. And over a year ago, she began taking on the task of how to take some of their kind of almost big iron type applications that are trying to really drive the next generation of cloud scale type development, and how to make them run atop Kubernetes. And at the time, it was a pretty big bet. But over the course of this conversation, you're going to hear a lot about that challenge, the journey of what happened in the process of that, and what happened with everything from implementation all the way through production. So if we can get a round of applause for Mike Vizard and Nishi Davidson.
Thanks, buddy. Hi, everybody. How you all doing? Good. I'm especially pleased to be here today with you because, in some ways, this is kind of like a holiday celebration of microservices. And when people think about SAP, they think of you kind of as the poster child for monolithic. So
yes.
So,
and I look very old, so.
So short of telling us about the cab that you used to get here, how did you get here today to have this conversation, and how did SAP get down this path, and where are you guys in the journey?
Sure. So I think from, like you said, SAP is always thought of as a legacy company. But it's very interesting that SAP in general has continued to be a very successful company. Kudos to the German engineers, and they've always retained their enterprise software market share. For SAP, a lot of cloud infrastructure is based on virtualization. You name it, and you can see all types of hardware inside our data centers. We also run cloud infrastructure for certain customers of ours who do not want to go to the public cloud. And so therefore, they want to be with us, and they want us to own their SLAs in terms of managing their applications. And so SAP, as such, has been struggling with a lot of issues that are there in legacy enterprise environments. Lack of standardization. Brendan Burns referred to it. When I started working on Kubernetes, I didn't even know what declaration is, right? I was so used to being imperative, I didn't even know the difference between the two things. And even today, every developer out there gets scared if you can't SSH into the box, if you can't exactly design how it looks and feels like. So as far as SAP is concerned, the main driver was we didn't have any standardization in the environment. We were deploying HANA in our HANA enterprise cloud environments, and the databases could be anywhere between 1 terabyte and 2 terabyte memory, which means we have huge servers that are underutilized and that occupy a lot of data center space. And that was a big challenge that we were looking at the time. And most of the SAP applications are Linux friendly. They're not Windows friendly, and therefore, virtualization is cool, but we wanted to see if there's something different we could do.
Now, there are a lot of different containers that work within SAP. HANA has its own containers. Then there's a HANA cloud platform that's based on Cloud Foundry. And then there's stuff that you guys are doing with Docker. So what is the total scope of the container strategy? And if you could describe that a little, I think people would be interested.
Yeah, I myself sometimes don't know how to answer that. It's so big, I feel lost. But I think there are two buckets. One is SAP as a traditional enterprise software company has its product groups that build the software. So HANA, the ERP suite, and everything that cooperates with Oracle database or Oracle as a company. And then they had to struggle with the cloud vendors coming out there. So obviously, you have to buy a bunch of SaaS companies, or at least try to make your software SaaS friendly. So there are multiple lines of businesses that are SaaS acquisitions. One of my friends is here, Dan from Concur. He's right there. And the Concur team is here, so everybody knows what Concur is. They are a part of SAP. There's also SuccessFactors, which does HR management system, and it's a SaaS model. There are companies like Ariba that does B2B sales, again, a SaaS company. So these are the SaaS properties that have their own DevOps teams, and they deploy Docker containers, their Docker containers into the cloud. You also have the product teams like SAP HANA, and it's also their job to move their legacy applications into the Docker containers so that it becomes ready for Kubernetes.
All right. So Kubernetes today you're using mostly in the SaaS apps?
Yes, we are using Kubernetes a lot in the SaaS environment. So Concur obviously has gone into production with a couple of their services. There's another line of business that's considering Kubernetes specifically, which is SuccessFactors. And we've containerized a lot of their legacy applications. And right now, we're looking at how could we create bare metal pods from existing infrastructure, provision them, and then just deploy Kubernetes on top to run the containers. Yeah.
And so how long have you guys been trying that or doing that effort now?
It's been a long time. It's been a year, like Redbeard said. He probably showed me the first time how to run a Kubernetes cluster, and probably looked at me and said, I don't know what you're trying to do, but this looks really crazy. Because these are really legacy, monolithic applications. Many of them require privileged access, which breaks into the whole security model, or at least people are nervous about it. And the binaries can be 4 gig in size. And so, you try to deploy them, and it takes 10 minutes to get deployed the first time. And that's kind of contrary to what people would expect out of a Docker container. But it's at least making that step forward where all the config files are neatly arranged inside the container, and they're not sullying the kernel. So you could kill the container and reconstruct it elsewhere. So long story short, I think we're moving forward in terms of that containerization journey, and that's more important from an SAP perspective.
So looking back at it now, what do you know now that you wish you knew a year ago that would have helped you or made a big difference in your effort?
That's a tough question. I ask myself that all the time. I think that we sort of, it's always difficult for me to, I wish I had known the Concur guys way ahead of time. Because it's like one corner of SAP not talking to the other corner.
That never happens in any of these other companies either.
Yeah. So if I had known that, then I wouldn't make mistakes like I made with my auto upgrade policy. Every time I set auto upgrades on CoreOS, and my cluster would fall apart, and I would not have a clue why that happened. They have a better way of doing it, where they have 2 clusters, they maintain one, upgrade it. If it works fine, then they maintain the other one, which is a better way of doing stuff. They also did something better with the load balancer, which I did not know about. And I think had I tried to do this again a year back, reaching out to the community is good. But in terms of large organization, it's also very important to understand who all are in the same boat and probably work with them more.
Do you think then maybe if you're a large company, you might want to think about setting up something that feels like a Kubernetes container center of excellence where at least everybody knows there's a place to go?
Yes, it's happening now. It's unbelievable, but in SAP now we feel like we're in a position where everyone knows, oh, those monkeys tried to do this 12 months back, and they probably know more than us. So now we have that view, but it's always painful to get it going for the first 6 months. Now there are multiple applications teams coming to us to talk about, do you think this is right? Do you think this is wrong? And it's growing, but I think that organically happens. Once you prove something out, then other people come to you.
So can you describe a little bit of the internal processes a little bit and how it all comes together? Because I'm sure it wasn't a kumbaya moment where everybody just locked arms and said, we got this DevOps thing nailed. So, what is the context of Kubernetes and DevOps, and how does it affect the way you guys approach the building and managing of an application?
Sure. So I'm not on the ops team side, and I belong to this lab team that goes and designs architecture and does proof of concept. So I obviously was welcomed by the engineering team of the line of business I was working with. As far as ops guys are concerned, they just have a surreal reaction to anything new. They're like, yeah, talk to me when you have something to show that is production ready and that's performant, but until then, don't come and disturb me. That's always the reaction. And now, the other interesting thing is in large enterprises, everybody's dev and ops teams are structured differently. So the line of business that I'm working with, the engineering team is bought in. They've containerized everything. We have a functional automation. We can provision hardware. We can then bring up the Kubernetes cluster along with monitoring, logging, alerting, everything. And that's what Tectonic could do also in a production setup. And then the containers are ready to go. But the ops team is still kind of, okay, I want to do a pilot and make sure that all my use cases are checked out. So those are the process challenges we have, and it's also a mindset change. I remember the gentleman from BNY Mellon was talking about cultural issues. Here we are proposing a tighter relationship between engineering and ops, and that's a mind change for the operations team. They're sort of like, okay, so you're saying if something goes wrong, then I go back to engineering? And well, I'm like, yeah, you get the right image from them and you roll back what doesn't work and you roll in the new image that engineering gives you. And so that mindset is also hard to tackle, especially in a company like SAP, which is big. And we're going through those process questions and changes.
Because they're still thinking about patches versus replacing core sources of code. There's a soup of terms out there these days. There's OpenStack, and there's Kubernetes, and legacy systems of all kinds, whether it's Microsoft, VMware, or whatever. How do you think Kubernetes is going to change the way people think about those stacks and interact with those stacks? Because it seems like it provides a level of abstraction that takes a lot of the underlying stuff off the table.
Right. I've spent 10 years of my life in enterprise, and after 3 years in working on this, I'm never going back. The reason being, the community sort of gives you all the tools you need in order to build a system end to end. And you don't have to depend on a proprietary vendor in order to build your stack, from the VLAN, from the routing layer to the virtualization to the storage layer. Everything, you can build it. We're talking about a world where I think VMware was an extremely successful company, and they did the job really well in terms of virtualizing infrastructure and increasing the utilization. But like Brendan said, it's imperative. It's like you have to SSH into the machine. You have to think about HA. You have to design it, and you have to take care of every server type. And you also have to look at the roadmap of VMware versus the OS versus the NetApp storage versus Cisco's VLAN and Juniper routing. It's crazy. In this new world, I think the main driver for us was, how can I make it hardware independent so that I'm not dependent on any vendor? If the vendor's router doesn't work, or switch doesn't work, or the storage plugin doesn't work, does not matter. I want NFS to work. I want SCSI to work. basic, and I'm using Ethernet or Fiber Channel, basic. I'm using Linux for everything, and then I can decide what software tools I want to use, and I don't want to SSH into the system. I just want to declare what the infrastructure should be giving me. And so going forward, I think we looked at a couple of options. We looked at Mesosphere. There's a business unit that's also using HashiCorp. They use a combination of Console, Nomad, and Terraform. But over this 1 year, I think every issue that other guys were flagging as gaps in the Kubernetes roadmap, whether it be storage, RBAC, resource control at a namespace level, security, everything has gotten covered at a tremendous pace. And I cannot say that there is anything that people can say is a gap today or is not getting built in the long run that justifies moving away from Kubernetes.
So there's a lot of talk in the last year about porting OpenStack to Kubernetes. And I'm just curious if that's a worthwhile effort in your mind, or do we need that, or can we just go with, core services in Kubernetes?
I have to be politically right, so this is a tough question. I think, so this is the way I'll answer this. Our OpenStack team has built their development cluster on CoreOS and Kubernetes. So basically, Nova, Neutron, all of those components are Dockerized, and they run the whole development cluster on bare metal Kubernetes. Now, when I flip that and forget about the world that runs with OpenStack, the only issue that Kubernetes does not do today is provisioning of your hardware. So you have different types of Cisco server. This is only for private cloud. This problem goes away in the public cloud. But in the private cloud, my only issue is provisioning. And how do I cable and discover different types of servers, switches, routers, all of them are cabled, and how can I discover them and deploy the kernel? Once I'm done with that, I don't need anything. I just need Kubernetes with the tools available as long as your applications are containerized. So my answer would be, we just need a provisioning tool which works. And thereafter, the whole world should probably move to bare metal, but I'm pretty sure that given the amount of virtualization in our data centers, we'll probably adopt a model where containers run inside the VMs. We're used to the whole idea of running Kubernetes, and thereafter we move to a complete bare metal model.
Right. So that sounds like kind of like training wheels, because the ops guys are tied up with their particular tools and they don't trust the tools per se.
Yeah.
So, if putting your crystal ball on, how far out do you think bare metal is?
I can't say for all of SAP because I'm not, that's beyond my pay grade. But as far as the line of business I'm working with, it's probably a 6 to 8 month journey. And also, pretty much everyone in SAP, I think Brendan mentioned this, is signing up with the public cloud. So the public cloud is real. AWS and Azure are major partners, so is Google. But pretty much everyone is using the public cloud. And when we think about the public cloud, it's easier to think about the container framework, because you don't have to do a hot migration of VMs, or that concept does not apply to containers. They die and you recreate them. So that whole concept flies really well in terms of portability into the public cloud. So I think that is going to solidify or push the drive towards containers more and more.
But even the public cloud guys are still running containers on VMs.
Yes, they are. And it's a matter of time and potentially them actually embracing it completely. But the portability of containers, whether it's run on VM or bare metal, becomes easier when you have containerized your applications.
So taking your SAP hat off and just a pure engineering hat, if that's the case, then over time, are we having a conversation about hybrid clouds, or is it just kind of a federated set of services and this is how the world's going to be? And the term cloud computing will finally, quote unquote, dissipate?
I don't know the answer, but wearing my engineering hat, it's easier for stateful applications. It's possible to copy data into the cloud, into any cloud, could be private cloud or public cloud. We have tested around 10 to 20 terabyte of storage being copied onto AWS using AWS Storage Gateway and also Avere Gateway solution into GCP, and then bringing up our containers up there. Now, all this is running inside VMs. It's not bare metal. But there is a way to enable hybrid cloud from that standpoint. There's also another way to look at it where the federation comes into the picture, which is how do you create tools on the top that potentially control single sign-on and what services you could use in AWS, GCP, or Azure. And there's a lot of interest in trying to control what type of services can be used in either of these clouds, because if someone tries to use a specific data service that's relevant to AWS, then it becomes difficult to move to another cloud very easily. So I think we've done it from the data side, stateful applications and how to move them and bring up containers from on the other side. We, of course, have to test performance and scalability, but we haven't thought of it from the management and being able to single sign on and control environments and what can be consumed from those environments, if that makes sense.
It does. And then I'll ask another question that might be politically sensitive, so heads up. But
you're not giving me an easy time.
Is there any such, in the future then, is there such a thing as an application? Or is it just a collection of logically connected microservices that I'm, invoking through APIs on demand, essentially?
I think that's what the founders of Kubernetes have tried to promote, right? And I'm not half as, or like not even 1/4 as intelligent as they are, but actually coming from the enterprise world and looking at this different design, it's so cool because you have your service and you have multiple containers underneath. You don't have to worry when the pods die. Your service is still up, and you don't have to worry which hardware it lands on. And the scheduling stuff that David talked about in 1.5 is all the more cool because then I don't have to worry about, I just have to tag my infrastructure, different infrastructure right, and I can write my policy, and there you go. Kubernetes takes care of everything. So yes, I think if we do it right and the community continues to grow at the pace at which it is growing, which is fantastic, by the way, we'll see a world where, yeah, everything is service-based, and why would we have it any way different?
And how automated do you think that can get? I mean, you see people talking about automation frameworks. Seems like Kubernetes is kind of a platform for that. You could start throwing in machine learning, I imagine, on top of that. But as you have your engineering hat and you look down the road a little bit, and you met somebody who was in college today, would you tell them to go into ops, or just what do you think that it's going to be like in a few years?
Interesting. Yeah, I do think one of my line of business VP said, you know what you're doing with this. If we bring this on, a lot of engineers will lose their jobs. Like, seriously, do you understand what this is doing? And I'm like, yeah, it's probably true. But that's where you want to get to, right? You want this amazing framework to work on any infrastructure out there. It's good for the business. And it also moves engineers into focusing into what's important, which is the application and the business of the application, not so much into infrastructure. And it's also to say that whether it's in the private cloud or the public cloud, infrastructure will always be there. It's just that the cost of owning infrastructure and probably purchasing infrastructure will go down. So total cost of maybe the industry earnings is going to go down in some form or manner. But the public cloud guys have done it so well. I mean.
But on the other end of that spectrum, there seems to be almost an infinite appetite for applications, so there'll be no shortage of things to do.
Yes.
They just won't be hardware-centric.
Exactly. It'll be lesser. And I think Intel, Jonathan talked about what Intel is doing, and some of the stuff that they're proposing is fantastic. I believe that they've also tried to look at libraries that can help Docker containers perform better, and more on the security side, which is what they're working with CoreOS on. So it's not like hardware vendors cannot do their bits. And I remember this, I worked for DSSD, which was acquired by EMC, an Andy Bechtolsheim company. ZFS founders created that company. Intel and DSSD worked on the NVMe driver, which is non-volatile memory express standard for Flash. Working on that protocol and the client driver are examples of software integrated with very high, good grade Flash technology that allows hardware vendors to differentiate. So it's not to say that hardware will no longer be important. It's just that it'll probably go up a notch, and it'll become much more intellectual, if you will. And hardware vendors will have to differentiate themselves, and companies like Intel are doing a fantastic job at that, I think. I mean, that's my personal opinion.
So last question before I ask the audience if they want to contribute a few, but how far is your planning horizon right now between what you're working on today versus when you think it's going to be deployed? How far down the road are you operating in terms of decisions made today and when they actually roll out?
So I think the concept with regard to Kubernetes was slightly new a year back. Looking forward, I think the appetite to accept the design all across SAP will be tremendously fast. So in a year or so, I wouldn't doubt probably Concur will completely productionize everything, and other lines of businesses will also move into production, and maybe the HANA Enterprise Cloud will, because they're releasing containers very soon, they have no reason not to move to Kubernetes. And if you were to compare, which orchestration vendor is winning, not vendor, but which orchestration technology is winning, there's no doubt that it's Kubernetes. So anyone wanting to move in that direction will obviously choose Kubernetes, and so my answer would be 12 months.
12 months, great. Anybody want to ask a question from the audience? Makes it difficult for me to see out there. All right. All right, then one more quick one. If you were thinking about containers in general, everybody talks about Docker, but there's multiple containers. Do you think you're going to wind up seeing the full gamut of containers, and how many container formats can there be?
No, I think Docker is accepted as the standard.
Because I'm asking because you guys have HANA containers, there are containers in Cloud Foundry, and there's Rocket, and so.
But those are applications inside Docker, and so Docker as a technology is going to be there, and there will be multiple applications will get Dockerized for sure. So there's 5 applications, very large legacy applications that we've already containerized, and moving forward we'll have more. But yes, Docker is accepted as the standard runtime.
I want to thank you for coming and sharing your expertise.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for the time.
Thank you.